Yes, so we are back, and there was an interesting question which I wanted to address about the whimsical decision of the Supreme to create night, irresponsible decision. He didn't think about us. And it's quite interesting how Sri Aurobindo describes this, because this was also an objection of the wife of Ashwapati to Narad, who explained how this world works and that Savitri has to face death and cannot live with her beloved more than 1 year. She said, then it is all just a whimsical decision of somebody, some fate, which is playing with us tricks. I refuse, she says, this kind of approach. I refuse this kind of treatment. She was rebellious with and in a way it's very close to that irresponsible decision. And Narad answers, very interesting answer. I will read a little bit, just to give you an idea. O mortal, who complains of death and fate, accuse none of the harms thyself hast caused. This troubled world thou hast chosen for thy home. Thou art thyself the author of thy pain. Once, in the immortal boundlessness of self, in a vast of truth and consciousness and light, the soul looked out from its felicity. It felt the Spirit's interminable bliss. It knew itself deathless, timeless, spaceless, one. It saw the eternal, lived in the infinite. Then, curious of a shadow thrown by truth, it strained towards some otherness of self. It was drawn to an unknown face peering through night. It was drawn to an unknown face peering through night. It sensed a negative infinity. I skipped a little and I go ahead. As one drawn by a grandeur of the void, the soul attracted leaned to the abyss. It longed for the adventure of ignorance and the marvel and surprise of the unknown and the endless possibility that lurked in the womb of chaos and in nothingness gulf, or looked from the unfathomed eyes of chance. It tired of its unchanging happiness. It turned away from immortality. It was drawn to hazard's call and danger's charm. Danger's charm. It yearned to the pathos of grief, the drama of pain, perdition's peril, the wounded bare escape. It wanted wounded bare escape to experience what it means. Can you imagine the one who is alone there, always happy, would have this experience? Wounded bare escape. The music of ruin and its glamour and crash. the savor of pity, and the gumble of love and passion, and the ambiguous face of fate. A world of hard endeavor and difficult toil, and battle on extinction's perilous verge, a clash of forces, a vast incertitude. Where would they have this vast incertitude if not here? The joy of creation out of nothingness. This is the joy. Strange meetings on the roads of ignorance and the companionship of half-known souls. That's what we are. We are companionship of half-known souls. This experience is very precious for the divine. Or the solitary greatness and lonely force of a separate being conquering its world, called it from its too safe eternity. This was the call. A huge descent began, a giant fall. For what the spirit sees creates a truth, and what the soul imagines is made a world. So, if you have this vision of manifestation, it's a completely different picture. Somewhere in ourselves, we feel this joy. We know it. We forgot it because we are very moralistic beings with many things on the top, with ethical behavior and so on and so forth. But within ourselves, this adventure of freedom, of trying things out, of making things wrong, of making things right. In everything there is a joy, an adventure. Is it not so? When we were children, at least, we felt it. Now we are just thinking what it could be. Anyhow, this second half I wanted to dedicate to the three Vedic epistemologies to come closer to the shift of paradigms and the treatment of consciousness in different systems of knowledge. Starting from Sankhya, then moving towards Vedanta, and finally to the Veda. First thing I wanted to say that, let us start. The central aim of knowledge is the recovery of the self, of our true self-existence. I think it's a very good definition of what is central aim of knowledge. The recovery of the self. Not the discovery. The self is there and has to be recovered. That means that you have it already. Only you. You assume, yes, but the word has a slight shift towards discovering. Yes, discovery, yes. Recovery is it's closer to that meaning.
To recover your health after bad health, to recover. You have to discover good health.
Yes.
Recover from it.
This statement seems like as if the self is kind of present.
Yes, it is so. At least for Sri Aurobindo. So, there were many different epistemological frameworks in the Veda. We have in Taittiriya at least mentioned several of them. Adhiloka, Adhijyautisha, Adhividya, Adhipraja, Adhyatman. 5 of them. But the central ones, so the 3 major epistemologies, were Adhibhuta, Adhidaiva and Adhyatma. So in the ancient conception of the universe, our material existence is formed from the 5 elemental stages of matter, the ethereal, aerial, fiery, liquid and solid, Everything that has to do with our material existence is called the elemental, adhibhuta. In the material, there move non-material powers, manifesting through the mind force and life force that work upon matter. And these are called gods or devas. Everything that has to do with the working of the non-material in us is called adhidaiva, that which pertains to the gods. But above non-material powers, containing them, greater than they, is the self or spirit, Atman. And everything that has to do with the highest existence in us is called the spiritual, Adhyatma. So we have Adhyatma, Adhidaiva and Adhibhuta epistemologies. You can clearly see immediately that Adhibhuta belongs to our scientific approach, yeah? Which has to do with something with matter, with material manifestation. Everything what we know as the humanities, psychology, philosophy, linguistics, sociology, art, belongs to something subtler in us, some adhidaivic approach. We want to tie it to the adhibhuta and we want to make it scientific, materialistic. But it has its own domain, its own laws, its own existence, and can be treated as such. But, yeah? Huh? Adhibhuta, gravitation. Yes, it's all about matter, material. Material universe, Big Bang. By the way, Big Bang was a joke. It was really a joke. People didn't accept, the whole scientific community didn't want to accept this notion. And somebody even joked on TV, said, "Oh, this Big Bang." And after that he said that Big Bang, it became popular and was accepted. It was like a miracle. You know? It's an interesting coincidence.
What's the difference is a fact about the Big Bang?
Yes, it wasn't accepted until it was joked about as Big Bang on TV. And then it became a very serious theory. So if you look at this composition, Adhyatma is, again, picture is deceiving because I put into the center more important, but it is bigger than Adhidaiva and bigger than Adhibhuta, so to say, it's opposite way. Adhibhuta is included in the Adhyatma. That's what Sri Krishna says in the Gita, that the world is in me, not I am in the world. And it is again confusing a bit, because the world is smaller than the divine. It's only partially, as we saw, where he withdrew his knowledge of himself from his power. In one part of himself, that became the night, the world. So Sri Aurobindo says, Adhidaiva is about faculties of consciousness, of the sight, hearing, of the mind and vital. And we will come to it. The whole presentation is about that. So Sri Aurobindo says in the Life Divine, the unknown is not the unknowable. It's also an important thing. What is not known is not unknowable. It need not remain the unknown for us, unless we choose ignorance or persist in our first limitations. For to all things that are not unknowable, all things in the universe, there correspond in that universe faculties which can take cognizance of them. And in man, the microcosm, these faculties are always existent and at a certain stage capable of development. We may choose not to develop them where they are partially developed. We may discourage and impose on them a kind of atrophy, but fundamentally all possible knowledge is knowledge within the power of humanity. It's a good news. So, there are faculties within the being which can be developed to know this being. It can't be that the being will be staying without being known. because there are faculties which are there to know it. So Sat and Chit are together. So consciousness is the aspect of being, attribute of being, or the quality of being, or the faculty of being, going together with being. So when we speak about consciousness, unfortunately we speak about consciousness in very abstract terms, always in conceptual, some to say, some consciousness is there, perception is there, but we never specify what it is. In the Vedas, and especially Vedanta, it is different. Consciousness is not some abstract notion. It has faculties. There is no consciousness without faculties. Why it should be? What kind of consciousness it would be if there are no faculties to know, or to perceive, or to understand? So what is consciousness then without faculties?
Faculties come in sense faculties.
Sense also, but it is on the material level. But in itself, it has faculties which are not material. We will come to it. It's the whole presentation about this.
But why you call it development but not discovery?
Discovery.
The development of faculties, why you should not call it?
Yes, this is an interesting question, and we will come to this just right now. Look at this picture. I put colors. It seems that this Adhidaiva relates to Purusha, and the Purusha Sukta represents this soul being involved in manifestation, this plunge of second creation, the plunge of the soul into the darkness of the inconscient, or into the being, yes, or into some kind of layout which was made by the first creation. This soul brought all the faculties. Aitareya, especially first part, gives us a picture of this creation again in the same manner. First he created the worlds, and then he created Lokapalan. Lokapalan nusrajaiti. May I create the dwellers of the world. And what he does, he takes Purusha out of the lower waters. Purusham samudritya murchayat. He created form out of Purusha. Tam abhyatapat tabhyatam tasyabhitaptasya mukham nirabhidyata yathandam. And he concentrated on him his energy, the self, and the Purusha broke forth. His mouth broke forth. Mukhadvak vachognih. From his mouth speech, from his speech fire was born. Tasya nasike nirabhidyatam nasikabhyam prana pranadvayu. From his nostrils the vayu, the prana was born from prana vayu. Akshini nirabhidyatam. His eyes broke forth. From eyes, akshibhyam chakshuh, chakshusha aditya. So from his eyes the sight was born, and from the sight the sun, the light. Tasya karnau nirabhidyatam karnabhyam shrotram shrotradishah. His ears broke forth. From ears the hearing, from hearing space was born. Now look at this, and so on. Look at this, that from his, so to say, self, the sight was born, and from the sight light which we see. So light is the consequence of the need to see, and not other way around. So the eye didn't develop because there was light, and over a million of years the light was developing. So there is another paradigm. His hearing was there, and because of hearing the space was needed, the space was born, and so on. So there is a subjective dimension to it, which is very interesting. We never saw it like this. That the need to see, to hear, to communicate created the world. So these are the faculties of consciousness. Universal faculties of consciousness. The need to see objectively himself, as Mother says. Yeah? The need to hear created the space. So what I want to say, these devatas, once they were manifested out of Purusha, they all plunged into the infinite ocean, Mahatyarnavan Prapatan. They fell into the great ocean of inconscient. And there they were tortured by, so to say, hunger and thirst. They didn't have the dweller. They kind of were projected out of the self into some other environment. So they called for the self to build the body suitable for their dwelling. And that was the evolutionary process. So first he brought them cow or the horse, and they said it's not enough for us. And then he brought them Purusha finally, and they said it's well done. Sukritam. No? This is well done. So the fire entered the speech and entered his mouth. Other way around, yes? The light entered the sight and entered his eyes. So what it says, interestingly, that all the faculties of consciousness which we have as individuals are universal faculties. We all share sight, we all share hearing, we all share possibility of self-expression, word. All of us, we share the same faculties. These are universal faculties individually used. And this is consciousness. These faculties are consciousness. It's not an abstract thing, consciousness. It's very concrete. And Upanishads are never dealing with consciousness in abstract terms. Always about the faculties. So these faculties, or these of Purusha, of the universal self, plunged into some otherness. And these are Adhidaiva, yellow. That may answer your question, why they have to be developed. Because once they were in the midst of somewhere else, not in the proper place where they belong, in the consciousness from where they were projected, they have to develop certain qualities and abilities. If you look at amoeba, which is just one cellular organism trying to move and to communicate and to touch, what do you think? Are those faculties already there within it, amoeba? The need to see, the need to touch, the need to hear, to communicate, all the needs, like in a nutshell, are already there. So they have to develop. So we are developing these faculties up to now. We are still not yet finished with the development of these faculties. Adhyatma and Adhibhuta appears only when the plunge takes place. Otherwise, before it was one being, one self. Adhibhuta is the self, but outwardly perceived by these Adhidaiva faculties. So when we turn outside the faculties, we perceive this world outside. When we turn them when we turn them inside, we perceive the universal faculties of that self, where they came from. Makes sense. Just a vision of these three epistemologies clarifies quite a lot. Why we have to turn our sight within. What we are looking for there within. We are looking for the original or universal origin of that faculty.
I see the one epistemology of the middle layer, but I guess I'm not sure what you're meaning by epistemology of the other two layers.
We will come to it. Yes, it is actually one, because we are looking at it now from the Adhidaiva perspective only. We are not looking from totally from Adhibhuta or Adhyatma. Adhibhuta is quite clear for me. It's a scientific approach, where by outer means you have to measure outer things. And Adhidaiva here is only just to communicate to you. All this, every Upanishad, every single one, you will not find consciousness described in abstract terms, conceptual terms, only as faculties. All of them. You will be surprised how far it goes. So the faculties of consciousness of Adhidaiva epistemology. So on Adhyatma level, consciousness operates. On Adhyatmic level, it operates by secret operations known as Samjnana, Ajnana, Vijnana, Prajnana. I will come to this presentation, do not worry. Sri Aurobindo gives a total description of these, how consciousness operates on that Adhyatmic self level, on pure consciousness. On Adhidaiva level, by faculties such as mind, word, hearing, seeing, manas and vak, chakshuksh and shrotram, and we can add even a prana and apana. I will come to it separately also. On Adhibhuta levels, by senses, indriyas of Sankhya, subordinate to the sense mind. I will come, don't worry, it will be step by step. So we have operations, faculties and senses of the same thing, of consciousness. Consciousness has, so to say, I'm using words, we can change the usage, but Sri Aurobindo uses secret operations, so I'm taking these operations for the self level, faculties for the Adhidaiva level, independent from the senses, so to say, within their own domain, and senses as we know them in the physical body, as eye, hearing, eye, ear, and so on. Faculties of consciousness in Sankhya known as indriyas or senses, they are dependent on manas, sense mind, or the sixth sense. They supply manas with information without which they cannot operate. It is by the manas that the eye sees, ear hears, and so on. There is a whole view on it in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad where Yajnavalkya says that we do not see without manas. So it's or do not hear without manas. We are selective. So manas is a faculty subordinate sense mind or sixth sense to the ahamkara, to the ego sense. That's why I was doubting whether ahamkara has to go totally, because it really represents the individual action of consciousness in the manifestation. So it has to become a channel of that force, a channel, pure channel, yes? And in that sense it disappears. But truly speaking, it is still functional and should function as long as this manifestation of separate beings and relations stays. So I will give you the whole view on Sankhya first paradigm. So there are two elements in Sankhya: Purusha, the spirit, the soul, and Pradhana or Prakriti, with three Rajas, Tamas and Sattva, three modes of Prakriti. Rajas, you know these terms, yeah? Rajas, Tamas and Sattva. For Indians it is known. Rajas is the fire, Tamas is inertia, and Sattva is clarity, purity. So once Purusha is attending to Pradhana or sharing his attention or touching it with its witness look, so to say, or touch or perception, Pradhana immediately mixes up all these three qualities, Rajas, Tamas and Sattva, and the manifestation takes place. So the first highest creation of it would be Buddhi, pure reason, then Ahamkara, ego sense, Manas, sense mind, and then we have 5 Tanmatras, 5 Mahabhutani, 5 Karmendriyas and Jnanendriyas. I cannot fit everything into one picture, that's why I simplify. So what is interesting here, that this is a very good example of the mental structure of consciousness, where the mind perceives the reality and figures out what is what, and all these elements, these tattvas, are very well defined. You may meditate on this scheme for the rest of your life. It will always give you some new insights into the reality. It's a very productive philosophical and psychological scheme, vision.
Please explain this one.
Yes. So the manifestation takes place from the. You can see clearly that buddhi, pure reason, does not depend on the sense mind. So to say, whatever senses are supplying as information is not relevant totally in buddhi on the pure reason level, where mind can think freely. Yeah. This was spoken many times by philosophers. They all go into that pure mind level or pure reason level where they can freely reason and breathe finally, free from the senses determining and supplying information with. Yeah? So to say, free thinking, pure reason of Kant or Hegel. Yes. Pradhana, it's Prakriti. It's a major force. By the way, these two elements are the only two elements in Sankhya philosophy. There are many Purushas, many souls, and there is one Pradhana. By the way, Sankhya is atheistic system because it doesn't have God. There are many souls, many Purushas. They are infinite, eternal. They don't die. And Prakriti is only one for all of them. And that is quite interesting because here we will have universality of the faculties, of the senses. We share the same senses, share the same faculties of consciousness, so to say, on the level of manifestation. Yes, I will give you this manas separately. So we have Pancha Mahabhutani, Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Apa, Prithivi. It's also very interesting from the ether, as one-dimensional, so to say, reality, there is a friction, air, that means there is some friction within the ear, the touch of one part of the ether to another part, or the knot, yeah, which creates air. And the third dimension to it will create heat and light, which is Agni, and the fourth dimension to it will create uninterrupted liquidity, movement of the substance which is not yet gross, which with one more element gives a grossness of it, earth. It's a very interesting psychologically true insight into the reality of the matter. So these are 5 elements, and behind them there are indriyas, corresponding to the similar kind. There is a hearing in the ether, there is a touch, there's friction in the vayu when the wind blows, and there is a sight of Agni because there is light, there is taste of the waters, and smell of Prithivi, of earth. So 5 senses correspond to the 5 levels of the matter.
Hearing is associated with, are they associated with, that is the first question. And the second question is how hearing is associated with ether and how smell is associated with Prakriti. How smell is associated with Prakriti. And how hearing is associated with ether or Akash.
Yes, in the Indian system, the vak, the word, which manifests the whole movement and the whole space comes. The whole space comes from this need to hear, as it is in the Aitareya. I was saying, his ears broke forth, and from ears hearing, and from hearing dishaha. Dishaha, directions of space. So space itself, as a carrier of the whole manifestation, was due to the need of hear. And we will come what is hearing. You do not see hearing in the same way. And after my presentation you will see that the hearing is something else altogether.
Even if we see it in our present understanding, here is it having the sound
Right.
waves, sound
Yes,
waves,
that happens in the air.
That's your
the
that's
air touches us.
yes.
But without the medium, sound waves cannot travel. In ether, there is no medium.
It's not completely so, because there is a vibration which is traveling through the ether or through the empty space of the universe, and nothing you can do about it. It is there. It vibrates. The gravitational wave, which is vertical and horizontal, travels with a huge speed throughout the universe and holding it together. The space and the vibration itself, if we widen the concept of hearing, not related to our earthly atmosphere of hearing where the air is to carry the sound, but the vibration as such in the space. Yes? If that is hearing, then hearing is relating to Akasha and not to the friction. It is the property of the space, the vibration of space. Vibration which is not frictional yet.
Is this hearing something different from what we understand by science?
Yes, it is a vibration. Yes. Yes? Yes. Yes, we will come back.
Akash may be the original term that was used associated with the hearing, not the ether. So ether may, this term doesn't exist in Indian cosmology. Ether, I mean ether. No, ether is that before Einstein philosophy, it was believed that the whole universe is going to be ether. That is a substance which is not seen, cannot experience, it is there. So that was the term ether which was used before the new fields came in.
Yes. The point is here, what Ajit is making, that the ether is no more, so to say, welcome in the scientific world, but actually we can review that also. And Einstein himself at the end of his life actually started to bring this point, but it was no more welcome in the scientific, so to say, milieu, and it was not accepted. He said that there was something like ether. Cannot be that there is no fabric of space. So what is that fabric of space? And it is very interesting, for example, very simple example from physics, that absolute zero, minus 273. What is that absolute zero? It's very close to us, minus 273 only. And you cannot go beyond it. There is no minus 300. The whole universe has no place where there is minus 300. What is this? That means the heat, the energy, yes, within this space is somehow related to the space. Akasha is also the light, and it is also associated with Marichi, with the particles of light within the space. There is some carrier, there is some fabric of it, which sustains the whole show, the space. So I'm not speaking scientifically here, but I think about it many times, and I think there is this element will come back very soon, because it is needed for the completion of the vision. I will go on. So in the pre-Sankhyaik paradigm, it was a bit different. There are three constant dvandvas mentioned in the Upanishads: manas and vak, chakshukh and shrotram, and prana and apana, or prana and annam.
Well, can you say a sentence or two about the relationship between Sankhya and the Upanishads?
Yes, the pre-Sankhyaik paradigm is more ancient, so to say. It's pre-mental. No? Where the mental structure is not yet dominating our way of looking at things. In the previous Sankhyaik, you saw that mind, sense mind, is the collector of all the information. Whatever indriyas are supplying, whatever senses are supplying, it chooses what to see, what to hear, and so on. It's already predominantly mental. We are living in this Sankhyaik paradigm still. We believe that our eye and hearing related to some consciousness, what we call mind. Yeah? Mind perceives, mind chooses what to see, what to hear, what to say. Somewhere there is someone who controls everything, and that is mind, manas, sense mind. And there is higher mind, which is free from the senses, but still it is that control, control over the sense mind and senses. And it is in a way true, if we look from this perspective. But there was another perspective of consciousness, on the faculties and consciousness, which was previous to it, pre-Sankhyaik of the Upanishads. And I'm going to it. These three dvandvas, manas and vak, chakshukh and shrotram, and prana and apana. So manas and vak is mind and speech. And this manas is very different from manas of Sankhya. It's not the same sense mind. It's the faculty of mind, the faculty of speech, vak, the faculty of hearing, shrotram, the faculty of chakshukh, seeing. They are not dependent on the mind. They are not to supply mind and to decide what to do. So to say that ahamkara, which is determining sense mind in Sankhya, is not yet totally crystallized or exclusively understood as consciousness, individual consciousness. It seems that they have, so to say, they represent consciousness freely within individual, who is not completely dependent on his own ahamkara, so to say. In Vedic terms, this is Agni and Soma, Aditya and Dishakh, Vayu and Annayu. These are universal faculties behind them. So if you can imagine, some of you may know that, for example, the speech, the faculty of speech, from the highest level of paravak, supramental level, where the speech is the expression of the self. When it is flushing, so to say, when it is coming down in the flesh, it becomes pashyanti vak on the mental level, as intuition. And then it comes down as a madhyama vak in the vital realms and forms the language, uses the language for its formation, and then it is known as vaikhari vak, the manifested, uttered word. So before the word is uttered, it has all the levels engaged, from the highest to the manifestation. So all these levels is the same vak, is the traveling of the same faculty of speech. The same happens with the mind. There is a supermind, there is overmind, there is intuitive mind, illumined mind, as Sri Aurobindo's terms, higher mind, mind. Then there is vital mind, or there is physical mind, there is mental vital, there is mental physical. So all these levels of one mind, from the highest to the lowest. The same with sight. There is the highest revelation of sight on the supramental level as direct revelation of the truth. When you see the faith of God, so to say. And then the sight travels down till it becomes the eye in the physical sense. The same with hearing. It is shruti, the inspiration on the highest level. Then it travels down and becomes this hearing of the ear. On every level, all these faculties are present. Now, you see the difference between the two? In the first one, they are all dependent on the sense mind. Mind decides what we see, what we hear, In this sense, they are free. There is somewhere individual or soul which is using these faculties from the highest to the lowest, and they are independent faculties.
In your slide, you have mentioned that these two faculties, manas and vak, chakshus and srota, they are in bandha.
Yes.
By bandha, do we mean conflict?
No, I mean dual, pairs. They are complementary. For example, Aitareya starts with Vang me manasi pratisthita mano me vachi pratishtitam aviravir maedhi vedasya ma'ani stha shrutam me ma prahasihi.
All of them are complementary to each other.
Yeah.
Chakshus and srota.
Yeah, I will tell. It's very interesting. There is very deep insight into this. My mind is established in my speech, and my speech is established in my mind. Now this is the dvandva. In order to express oneself subjectively, you have to hold oneself subjectively, and that was the manas. Manas, when you hold yourself, that can express oneself, and that expression is dependent on the oneself. So they are both, so to say, in one set. They are active faculties of consciousness, whereas chakshus and shrotra are perceptive. And in a way you can see clearly that if vak is an expression of that hearing, what we hear, yes? It is the action of hearing, if you like. Yeah? It's the vibration of the space which we can perceive. That is the speech. Then what would be the active action of seeing, if it is perceptive? Now, if the active counterpart of hearing is word, what would be the active counterpart of the seeing? Image. What is image? Exactly. What? Say it. Please say it. Just think. Doesn't matter. All things are welcome. It's really, sometimes we come to unexpected discoveries when we think.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, if the word is the vibration of space, the active state of space, which is hearing, is perceptive, and the word is active manifestation of the same. What would be the active manifestation of the seeing? Light. Image. How would you act with seeing? Can you act with seeing? If you act with hearing, it is the word. You articulate something, you vibrate the space. How would you act with seeing? You have to act, not to perceive, but to act.
To envisage, to plan.
Yeah, to envisage, to plan. To think. Thought. Just look at this beautiful scheme. And actually I checked with Savitri, and it is very interesting how Sri Aurobindo is using mind and thought. It is always related to the vision, to the sight. It is a part of that action. It's an active counterpart of seeing. So the active counterpart of hearing is the word, the active counterpart of seeing is thought, image. Image is thought. How would you imagine image if you would not think?
Can you have image of thought independent of word? And it's something that...
Yes, you can. All these can be separately, so to say, independently, so to say, thought of. But they are never independent in the consciousness, because it always, one brings another. Image brings word, word brings image, and seeing and hearing go together, though they are different. What is the difference between seeing and hearing? Who can define this? No, fundamentally, psychologically. Can you really try to define this? Did you ever think about it? So these are the faculties of consciousness, and consciousness is dealt with only in terms of faculties in the Upanishads, not as such, not as some kind of entity, but as faculties. Seeing and hearing, these are the faculties of consciousness, and they are pervading the whole hierarchy of being, from the highest height to the physical manifestation.
Where would something like music, because art is articulated speech, where would music come into the scheme of things?
Also there. It's sound, yeah. Shabda Brahman, as somebody was mentioning, is also the origin of music. Can't be other thing than sound, than vibration of space. I cannot dwell more because of time. If we are to discuss it later, it's a very interesting topic, especially I didn't touch prana and apana. But I will say one short thing very fast, that these manas and vak, chakshuk and shrotram, are considered to be Brahma Chatushpad, Brahman on 4 legs. It is by these 4 that Brahman entered the manifestation. And when he entered the manifestation, he became prana and apana, matter. So matter, animated matter, matter animated with the spirit, with the life energy, is the result of these faculties being projected into the manifestation, into that inconscient when we look at in the first part. So this life force is not independent from the seeing and hearing. And this prana and apana is touch, what we know as touch. So we have 3 different cognitive realities of hearing, seeing and touch. Only 3. What about smell and taste? They already need the material manifestation, and they are a reflection of these 3 in that material manifestation. Smell is particles of earth traveling to your sense. It's not really an original faculty, as you see, yes? If particle is to touch you, touch is already there. So it is kind of recreated or reflected within the material manifestation. The same with taste. Though there is more to think about it, and I would not really go into smell and taste now. So, the faculties and the varieties of consciousness. There is a distinction between 2, and it is quite interesting for us to notice. There are 2 different approaches to the studies of consciousness. One is about the faculties, on the transcendental, universal and individual levels of consciousness, and the other approach is about the soul, and its influence through these faculties on the world. The soul, which is involved in the process of evolution, trying to emerge and to guide all the other members of consciousness, is called Antaratman or Chaitya Purusha, or the psychic being. It is using all the members of consciousness to express itself and to build up a passage through them, so to say, to the surface of consciousness, where it should bring its influence and light, for that was the original purpose of it coming down into the material inconscient with the help of these very faculties. Now, in the Aitareya, it is clearly there that when these faculties plunged into the inconscient ocean, they brought with themselves, not truly, but pulled on that side, the whole Purusha, who remained transcendental, who didn't enter, but who projected faculties of consciousness. So they demanded his presence in the body, in some kind of manifestation. They wanted him to be there because that was their dwelling space. So they wanted the Purusha be there, and Purusha was built in evolutionary process, and that is the psychic being. The Purusha built in the evolutionary process with the help of these very faculties projected from the soul. Do you see this? This is this part of Aitareya is considered to be the most secret part of knowledge, and Shankara even speaks about this. It's only for the initiate. And I thought about it all my life and never could really figure out until the recent moment that I saw how these faculties pool the soul and rebuild it, and that is the psychic entity which is becoming more and more individual psychic being. And Mother says we all have psychic presence within ourselves, but we do not have totally formed being. It takes time. So, Adhyatma epistemology, there are two major approaches to the studies of the self in terms of operations of consciousness. I'm using Sri Aurobindo's term secret operations of consciousness and the varieties of the psychic being. I separate them for the sake of presentation, and I think they are still separate as entities, and you will see why. Now I'm coming to the operations. There are secret operations in us, in our subconscious and superconscious selves, which precede this action. He refers to something, but of these we are not aware in our surface being, and therefore for us they do not exist. If we knew of them, our whole conscious functioning would be changed. So we do not know how consciousness operates. But Sri Aurobindo knew, and he will give us this knowledge. Essential operations: samjnana, ajnana, vijnana, and prajnana. Samjnana, the essential sense. Everything begins with vibration or movement, the original kshobha or disturbance. If there is no movement in the conscious being, it can only know its own pure static existence. That is consciousness without faculties. Or maybe even there are faculties, only they know pure static existence. The sight sees pure static existence, the hearing hears pure static existence, silence. The word is prakasha, not vimarsha. It is still involved in the light of consciousness in the tantric tradition. And the mind, the self, stays with the being. So without vibration or movement of being in consciousness, there can be no act of knowledge and therefore sense. Without vibration or movement of being in consciousness, there can be no act of knowledge and therefore sense. Without vibration or movement of being in force, there can be no object of sense. So this Chit Shakti, the consciousness force, vibrates or moves, and vibration in Chit or in knowledge part creates the sense, and vibration or movement disturbance in power creates the object of sense. The sense and the object of sense. Movement of conscious being as knowledge becoming sensible of itself as movement of force. In other words, the knowledge separating itself from its own working, to watch that and to take it into itself again by feeling. This is the basis of universal samjnana. This is true both for our internal and external operations. Now, this is a very important definition of consciousness, of the sense and the object of sense. Movement of conscious being as knowledge becoming sensible of itself as movement of force. The knowledge separating itself from its own working as power, because consciousness power is one, it separates its knowing from its working of force, and attending to it as if anew, taking it again into itself, as if it is discovering it. As if now only I know it. Before I didn't know it, because I separated my knowledge from the working of that power. Now I take it back to myself. I identify myself with the object of sense, and in this way I know it, I feel it, I become it. It's the basis of the universal samjnana. I know it is mind-blowing, but you will have to come to it again and again and again until you see. And once you see, there is no problem with understanding of everything. Then we can explain why this table is table, how it knows to be a chair, how a microphone knows to be a microphone, because there is the knowledge of this self is involved in that even unanimated matter. It stays as such because it is knowing itself as such in this presentation. Now we are consciously trying to understand it. We separate our knowledge from the workings of that force in order to take it anew, fresh, to know it, to discover it as if. But actually it is involved there. That's how we know how it is true. We know it that it is true because it is involved, and we discover that which was involved. I will give you more examples, one more, another here. I become anger by a vibration of conscious force acting as nervous emotion, and I feel the anger that I have become by another movement of conscious force acting as a light of knowledge. This will explain to you a lot. I am conscious of my body because I have become the body. That the same force of conscious being which has made this form of itself, this presentation of its workings, knows it in that form, in that presentation. I can know nothing except what I myself am. If I know others, it is because they are also myself. Because myself has assumed these apparently alien presentations as well as that which is nearest to my own mental center. All sensation, all action of sense is thus the same in essence, whether external, internal, physical or psychical. All knowledge is in front of you. Take it and develop it. This is the profound psychological knowledge of how consciousness acts, and an explanation of samjnana, a universal sense. Yeah?
Is it possible to translate this word samjnana into one English word, just to get a feel of that word? Is it possible?
Yeah, we will try. I will come to the etymology of these words, of four of them in one slide. But do you understand what is this essential sense? It is the property of the self, so to say, to be able to identify with any object and to take it into itself, to bring it in. Yes, yes.
The word consciousness is actually the same as
Exactly,
samjnana.
exactly. Very good point. Consciousness is samjnana. We will come to the etymology. I want to give it at the end. It will give you more. I thought it will give you. Maybe it's time to give it now also. But step by step, because there are 3 more operations of consciousness which are necessary for consciousness to operate. Yeah? Okay, samjnana is the contact of consciousness with an image of things by which there is a sensible possession of it in its substance. If prajnana can be described as the outgoing of apprehensive consciousness to possess its object in conscious energy, to know it, I would add to know it as such, samjnana can be described as inbringing movement of apprehensive consciousness, which draws the object placed before it back to itself so as to possess it in conscious substance, to feel it, to be it, to feel yourself as that. Not to know it as such, but to make it your own and to know it as you are, to identify yourself with the object. Knowledge by identity. This is the principle of consciousness, the central principle, the first one. But there are three more, without which consciousness will not operate. Prajnana is one of those.
But then is it same also that it is the most essential?
Yes,
Knowledge by identity is the essential piece of why
it is the first, without which there is no second. Prajnana is the consciousness which holds an image of things before it as an object, separately, holding it at a distance, with which it has to enter into relations and possess by apprehension and analytic and synthetic cognition, to know what is there, so to say, not as myself, as a separate self, as if, yeah, of course. Because without that, samjnana prajnana would not take place. We will see it at the end. So samjnana can, an apprehensive knowing, by becoming one with the object of knowing, or by making it part of oneself, can be identified with the major faculty of subjective self-knowing, manas. Manas in the Vedantic sense, not in the Sankhyayic sense. It is only by identifying with the image of things that one can actually know it. It is apprehensive because it appropriates the image of things into oneself. It makes an objective image a part of the subjective self, and by that knows it. It is based on the essential sense operating through knowledge by identity. Prajnana is another apprehensive consciousness. Apprehensive knowing which operates by dwelling on the image of things bit by bit through analytic and synthetic cognition, recognizing it as such. It can be identified with objective self-knowing, seeing. The discrimination, drishti, etymologically cutting into pieces, distinguishing the elements in the image of things. It is apprehensive because it deals with these elements and knows them as such, as if objectively, not as oneself, as other self, as if. Now without this prajnana, manifestation will not take place. And Aitareya says that all these, and it starts samjnanam, ajnanam, vijnanam, prajnanam, medha drishtir, dhritir, matir, manisha, jutik, smritik, sankalpa, kraturasu, kamo, vasha, iti, sarvan yevaitani, prajnanasya namadhyayani bhavanti. They are all the names of prajnana, this possibility to objectivize the self, to see it objectively. It is because of this need to see that all these faculties make sense and work for that manifestation. It's an amazing knowledge. Now I'm coming and finishing with two more faculties before we finish. Vijnana is the original comprehensive consciousness which holds an image of things in its essence, totality, parts and properties. It is the original, spontaneous, true and complete view on it, which belongs properly to the supermind, and of which mind has only a shadow in the highest operations of the comprehensive intellect. Now, there are two apprehensive consciousnesses, so to say, two operations of apprehensive consciousness. Outgoing knowing as such, and in-bringing knowing as oneself. In-bringing is samjnana, outgoing is prajnana. There are two more comprehensive consciousnesses. Vijnana, holding the totality of things and knowing in all the parts and all the properties, in all the essences, all the elements as such. Without this, outgoing and inbringing would not be possible. It needs the space within which that could take place. This is comprehensive and subjective. Subjective in a sense that you know the essence, in its very essence, in the details of the essence. These are all subjective, all of them. I say as if objectively because our mind operates like this. We cannot think otherwise. Ajnana is, and the last, ajnana is the operation by which consciousness dwells on the image of things so as to govern and possess it in power, to command it, to change it, regardless to its place, regardless to its position, regardless to its characteristic. Now, two comprehensive ones. Dwelling on the image of things with the power to change it, and then knowing the totality of things where it belongs. These two, plus to those two apprehensive, constitute all four operations of consciousness, secret operations within us. So ajnana is a comprehensive movement of consciousness expressed by the power of the self to rule over or to command the image of things. The logos, the will, is expressed by the self and can be identified as the essential characteristic of the faculty of the word, vak. It is comprehensive because it expresses the subjective self. Though it is oriented towards something, it is still originated within the comprehensiveness of the self. It is not inbringing into the self and not outgoing and knowing it as objectively, apprehensive two moments, but it is outgoing of the self as command towards any image of things. And the vijnana is a comprehensive, simultaneous knowing of all the parts in their relations and essence. Supramental, subjective and comprehensive knowledge can be identified with the essential characteristic of Shruti, all-including and all-pervading presence of the spirit, hearing. It is comprehensive because it holds the image of things in relation to all other images in the subjective way. It knows their relations. It's a relational knowledge, that's why it's comprehensive, knowing the essential oneness. I know it's too much. But what I wanted to make a link between the secret operations to the faculties which appear on the adhidaiva level later, that they are not arbitrarily appearing. Seeing and hearing, mind and word are not just popping up from somewhere else. They are already inbuilt in the very secret operations of consciousness.
So it seems like the second and the fourth are more developed in the Western approaches, especially the second.
Second, what do you mean second?
And
Yes, prajnana, yes. Very true. So I will end with the etymological significance in 3 minutes, since there was a question. Samjnana is subjective self-knowing by identity, so that's consciousness. Jnana word is a very interesting word. It is knowledge, but knowledge which is very subjective, so to say. Sri Aurobindo translates jnana as self-realization. It is not knowing objectively or discovering something. It is the state of the consciousness, of the knower. So the state, so to say, self-realization in totality, some means completely, totally, taken in, is subjective self-knowing by identity with the image of things. So to say, identity with the image of things. Ajnana is subjective self-expression upon the image of things. So to say, ajnana, longer. Vijnana is knowing in detail and essence all relations with the image of things. And prajnana, knowing objectively the image of things as such by analytic and synthetic cognition, as if other self. And these four are always acting together and never visible separately. And because of that, we have the consciousness acting. That's why that's how we can know anything. as such or as ourselves, to feel it, to know it as such, and so on and so forth. To know it in relations in the higher, wider context as Vijnana permits us, or to change it and to act upon it with our knowledge, regardless to the knowledge and position of that thing, ajnana, with a command, breaking the rules. Yes?
The last two, why they are called comprehensive, that's understandable. But why is first called apprehensive?
Yes. Because it is in bringing the image of things into oneself. It's already apprehending it. It is not... it is taking the element, the image of things, into oneself, which is not oneself making it oneself. Don't get it, yeah? You think about it. It is Sri Aurobindo's definitions. Yes.
It's knowledge by identity. Person is something himself. He must find something.
Yes. Knowledge by identity is if we take it as a result, as the major faculty, identity with what? With something which is not self. And there is an apprehension. As I understand it. We have no time anymore. So, sorry. Maybe we will do more on the Varieties later, and it will be okay. So.